Welcome to Yavneh. The importance of Yavneh is in inverse proportion to its neglect, to its state of overgrown weeds and ruins. It's 40 years before the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, and everything is going wrong. The red thread on Yom Kippur is not turning white. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, hide it. The doors of the temple are flinging themselves open and closed by themselves. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, stop, you're going to be destroyed, but you stay out of it. The great Sanhedrin moves out of its place in the temple. Maimonides, the Rambam says, the people of the Sanhedrin are the expression of the oral Torah. These human beings form the continuity of the Torah from Mount Sinai and on. We are left with no king, with no high priest, with no temple, and ultimately with no Jerusalem, but we come to a Yavneh, because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai escapes Jerusalem and asks Vespasian, Tain li Yavneh v'chachameha, give me Yavneh and its scholars. And here he made various enactments. One of them is that Sion boi drisha, Zion needs to be sought after. So as the Mishnah says in Rosh Hashanah, Barishona haya alulav nitel b'migdash shiva, when you're lifnei Hashem in front of God, the four species are shook together on Sukkot every single day. And in Medina Yom Echad, outside of the temple, or outside of Jerusalem, according to Maimonides, one day. Mishachar of Beit HaMikdash, when the temple was destroyed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai established that we shake the lulav all 7 days. Zecher LeMikdash, we must remember the Mikdash. Another halacha, which Rav Meir Holder of blessed memory puts together, is that we blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, even on Shabbat, in front of the Sanhedrin. And then, as this Mishnah continues, V'shei Yom Hanev Kulo Aser, the 16th day of Nisan, when we wave the barley offering, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai makes sure that we cannot eat the new grains of wheat on that day, even though now there's no offering, because speedily the temple will be rebuilt. And in that year, people will say, oh, we can have the new grain. And they won't realize, no, now we have the temple, we have to wait till the offering is brought. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai remembers the past, deals with the present, and builds the future. And a series of decisions by the great Sanhedrin here in Yavneh forges the Jewish people in exile. So Rabbi Gamliel establishes the calendar here and forces Rabbi Yeshua to give in on establishing the date. And here Beit Hillel are chosen over Beit Shammai. A series of decisions in which a prime issue is shelo yarbe machloket b'Yisrael, that should not be arguments within Yisrael. And achrei rabim lahatos, we follow the majority, and that's the way we'll work. So even though Rabbi Eliezer's view even gets seeming heavenly support, Rabbi Yeshua stands up and says, Lo b'shamayim hi, you gave it over to us, and we'll determine it. The celebration of Torah Shebal Peh, of the oral Torah, its continuity, even with nothing else, is what Yavneh stands for, which is why the most common name for a Jewish educational organization throughout the world is Yavneh, by far exceeding every other name. This is Yavneh. This is where Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai ensured that we would continue. This is where Rabbi Gamliel put himself out and ultimately suffered because he wanted to maintain and make sure there should be no machlokes. When the people of Beitar were killed and miraculously they were buried on Tu B'Av, in a generation later, it's the rabbis of Yavneh who establish a Tova Meitiv. The Shmona Esrei, an additional prayer, is added here. The fourth blessing of Birkat HaMazon is added here. Yavneh is central. I'm suggesting for our learning of Yavneh here today is that it's the continuation of the Torah and ensuring the fluency of Torah And the feedback, are we really responding to the Torah, or have we decided our own social mores? Let's reflect, let's go back, let's make sure there's learning. And in so many communities, before they had money for anything else, they built a mikveh and they made sure the children would be learning. That's what we have to do, the learning, the fluency, the listening. Im Shema b'yashan tishma b'chadash. If we review even the old, we'll have new insights. Yavneh is what allows us to thrive. We come out of destruction and we become even greater through the learning all over the world, and then ultimately Kibbutz Galuyot reuniting here in Eretz Yisrael. This is ground zero. This is Yavneh.
Today, Kaf Zayin B'Tammuz, we're going to talk about the secret of Am Yisrael's survival throughout the period of the Galut, a secret that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai understood when he asked for Yavneh, a place for the Jews, for the Chachamim to learn Torah, and for the Jews to gather in order to learn Torah. Of course, this has always been the secret of our survival in Galut, even though we don't have the Beit HaMikdash, even though that we don't take with us national autonomy, we have the Torah, which is portable, the source of communal unity, and the source of our relationship with God. A midrash in Eicha Rabbah recognizes this, commenting on the words of the Gever in Perek Gimel Pasuk Kaf Aleph, when the Gever, after having undergone terrible suffering, says, Zot ashiv el libi al kein ochil. This I will think about, and therefore I will have hope. And the midrash says, what is it that he's thinking about that gives him hope? The midrash answers, Ein zot ela Torah. Shene'emar, v'zot ha-Torah asher sam Moshe. Zot refers to the Torah. It is the fact that the Gever recognizes that he can still learn Torah that gives him hope during this period of his suffering. Now the Midrash goes on and offers a wonderful mashal in order to make this point clear. The mashal is to a king who marries a woman that he's very much in love with, and he gives her a vast ketuvah. And then the king goes off to a distant land, and he's delayed there. At that point, the queen's neighbors come in, and they mock her, and they say to her, oh, the king, he's never coming back from that faraway land. He has given up on you. And the woman begins to cry, the queen begins to cry and to moan, and then she goes into her home, and she takes out the ketuvah, and she reads it, and she remembers the king's great love for her. And at that point, the Midrash tells us, the king comes back from his journey, from his long journey, and he says to his wife, I'm amazed. How did you wait for me for all these years? And she responds, King, were it not for that wonderful ketuvah that you had given me, I would have already lost hope. The nimshal, of course, is to Am Yisrael. And the Midrash says, when Am Yisrael experiences galut, they experience the sense of God's distance. And this is compounded, this terrible, painful experience is compounded by the idolatrous nations that come to the Jewish people and say, God has abandoned you. He no longer regards you as the chosen people, and he is never coming back. And Am Yisrael, in their misery, they cry and they moan, but then they go into the Batei Midrashot, they go into the study halls, and they open the Torah, and they recall God's great love for them. We recall God's great love for us, and all of the promises that God promised the Jewish people. The Midrash concludes by saying, Limachar, tomorrow, ksheyavo kates hageula, when the end will come, when the redemption will come, amar lahem hakadosh baruch hu Yisrael, God will say to Yisrael, Banai, ani tamea mikem, my children, I am amazed by you. How did you wait for me for all those years? And Am Yisrael will respond, Ilulei Toratcha shenatata lanu, were it not for the Torah that you gave us, we would indeed have been lost. The Torah, Limud Torah, has always been the secret of Am Yisrael's survival, even when we are in exile, even when we are distanced from our land.